I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone in the men's room today. It's been a little bit over a year. We had Josh come in and facilitate a fabulous discussion. And today he's back to walk us through a discussion about cultivating intimate connections between meaningful work and fulfilling relationships. So that is the topic of the hour. And I've got my co-host Conrad with me here today. And we're going to give you the space, Josh, and then we're going to, well, as we're having our conversation with all of the men on the call, we will, add to the conversation. So really, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kick this off. And why this is so
Awesome.
important to us today and for the men, and why it's so important to you now to be bringing this up.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Linda. It's good to be back. Hey guys, good to be back with you. Conrad, thank you for co-hosting, and it's good to see some of y'all again and see new faces in here as well. What I would like to bring to the space just to start, I guess, is just, my own personal kind of take and sentiment here on why this is such an important topic. How I've kind of arrived at this in my own life, and I work with a lot of men through coaching around the topics of work and intimacy as well, and why it's so important. And so I'll just kind of open the space by saying that I think that our most nutrient dense areas for living fulfilling and meaningful life as men comes from a sense of purpose and a sense of depth, right? And so it really stems from or can be traced back to what we do with our time and who we do it with. And it feels so true. It feels so obvious. It feels so of course, right? And yet it seems to be those are the two areas where men struggle so deeply, where there's like such a sense of disconnection and distance and feeling sterile and feeling numb and feeling so far away from the lives that we know we could be living. And that's something that I've struggled with deeply myself. It's something that I now do a lot of coaching on. It's something that, I'll have to test myself with constantly, right? I think that meaningful work and deep and intimate relationships are where we are really called forth. It's not all rainbows and butterflies. It's where we are most deeply challenged, pressured, called into the arena to become better versions of ourselves. And there's a beautiful sacred struggle that comes with that. So I think it's important to always be in a space where we can have these conversations openly and vulnerably about our struggles in these deep areas where we struggle, which happen to also be areas where we tend to feel the need to pretend that we have it all figured out. So that's I guess how I'll just kind of open this up. And I think a question that I would throw into the center would actually even just be for some feedback and for some other opinions of what you guys think about that and about these two areas of purpose and depth, work and intimacy, and what that's looked like in your own lives, and if you agree that seems to be where a lot of us as men do struggle.
Okay, perhaps I'm going to go first then. Somebody needs to start, right? And as it happens, I also work with a lot of people as a coach, consultant, hypnotherapist. And so what you're talking about is really, well, an everyday occurrence, so to speak, and a mix of those, right? And a mix of those can be quite a potent influence on a person's life. And I mean life and business. From a certain perspective, that difference between life and work or life and business is very artificial, because in a way we are the person living the experience. And so sometimes people, for example, focus just on business to the detriment of life. It can take them way out of balance, and then their personal relationships tend to suffer a lot. So they get to a point of success when it comes to their business and income perhaps, However, in many cases, they find themselves quite empty-handed. Yes, they have the respect, perhaps, the money, a sense of professional fulfillment and progression. However, because the private component seems to be lacking, because the private connections have been diminished by being so overly focused on work and building networks, and let's say even everyday business activities. So many people wake up at some point in their life feeling empty, unfulfilled, out of place. And that can be quite a reality check, actually. That can be quite challenging, despite the acumen, despite a level of prosperity, but it's not prosperity yet, really, because money doesn't equal prosperity. What is the good life? Where is the fulfillment? What is the joy? What is the love? This is when we combine personal and professional fulfillment. This is where the game truly begins. This is where we can take our growth to next level, and next level, and next level, and next level again. And the same can apply, obviously, to the other side too. If there were to be any sides at all, I feel that sometimes people focus so much on their private life to the detriment of their businesses. And so they make so business decisions, and perhaps they don't pay attention to networking, for example, or fully taking their professional opportunities to next level. And again, they might reach a certain level of deep connections with people in their personal life. However, again, they might find themselves quite paradoxically unfulfilled again, because perhaps they also would love to experience that level of recognition for who they are, for what they can do professionally also. And so it's about that ephemeral balance, perhaps, knowing that there are two sides to every story, knowing that there is light and shadow and everything in between. And in the end, from a certain perspective, there is also the third aspect, the very awareness of the two in the first place. So one can look just on the bright side, or one can look just on the dark side of life. But in the end, it's life after all.
So I'd love to chime in there if you don't mind, Conrad.
Go.
Because
go.
I'd love to touch on what you just said is the awareness. You know what I mean? Too many of us don't even want to look that deeply into our fulfillment, into what is missing. We don't want to have that deeper look because of what we might find, right? We all know most of us are left unfulfilled. There's still a deep wanting inside of us. And is that on an emotional level? Is it on a professional level? We all want to leave a legacy, but we as men, I find, even when we want to have deeper relationships, we don't let people in, right? We close the door. We don't let them get close. We spend 8 to 10 hours of our professional lives, at least if we go to a profession or a place of work, we spend 8 to 10 hours of our lives among people that we're very, very familiar with. But yet these people are distant from us. We keep them at an arm's length. But yet the people who matter most to us, we spend very little time with. And we're supposed to let these people into our lives. We're supposed to have that deep, intimate connection, right? With our loved one, with our spouse, with our partner, with our family and friends. But truthfully, we don't let them close enough. I think it's just, and maybe not everybody's this way. I'm an open book, but even I've got my guard up to a certain aspect, right? I don't let people know my deepest, darkest feelings. And you guys were, Conrad and Linda were part of my show where I opened up about something I kept secret from people for a long, I'm 50 years old. It's not something I discussed with people, that I was addicted to anything at all. But because I didn't let that out, because I didn't make that common knowledge, I was putting up a barrier, and nobody could break through that barrier if I didn't want them to. So I think that's kind of what it boils down to, is we as men put up a barrier, and that blocks the communication, it blocks the intimacy, it provides us a certain sense of security that no matter what, I get to show who I am, how I show up, and this is the person that people are going to see.
Those are excellent points that you bring up there, RJ, because I heard you say that you got to be kind of in some way brave to want to open that inner self to take a look, and that when you're not, bringing down the walls and letting people in, that causes blockages. And so, it's about showing up. Like if you want fulfillment and you want intimacy, then you got to look into yourself. You got to lower those walls and open up the lines of communication so that the relationship, that nurturing of relationships can happen. And it takes a lot to be able to do that. And, I hear all the time, like when somebody tells me this, like, I need to bring this up as from a woman's perspective, but they tell me that I don't need to rely on anyone else. I'm going to do it myself. That there is an indicator that there's this issue of not having that connection, to not being brave to look at oneself, and not opening up to speak to things. And, when I hear that, I do challenge in a compassionate way that if you want that intimacy in any type of relationship, you've got to get brave. You've got to get bold. And the moment you open up that conversation and you show up to do it, and you do it with intentionality, you do it with the open and willingness, it will change powerfully that dynamic of that relationship. Hands down. But I think that there's a little bit of resistance to want to go to that space for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and RJ, you mentioned, looking in the mirror, right, and being afraid of what you might find. And I think it's all about the relationship that we can develop with our own longing, because it's very, very scary to tap into, like there's a lot at stake, right? Egocentrically speaking, there's a lot at stake to admit that I'm not living the life that I want more, or this relationship isn't serving me, or this job isn't serving me. It feels empty. I feel empty. I feel alone, even though I'm, wheeling and dealing, right? Like Conrad, like you said, I have the accolades, I have the acumen, like it's all looking great, but yet like I feel so empty. And so there's so much at stake to have that conversation with oneself in the mirror. And where I think we're limited in how we can have that conversation with other people if we can't have it in the mirror, because there's then some level of superficiality that we remain at unless we have come to terms with the fact with ourself that like I've faced this ugly truth and I'm still alive and I'm still here, and I get to know that like, wow, there's this whole new playground on the other side, even though it might feel like a torture chamber, right? It doesn't feel like a playground at all times. But that's where a lot of the gold exists interconnectedly to other people. But first, we must go there within ourselves. So it's hard. It's hard. And the barriers that you're talking about are so real. So I guess, where do these barriers come from? I think we all have, probably general answers, but if anyone wants to speak to where their own barriers maybe have developed in their own lives, in their own work, in their own relationships, how do you guys deal with them?
Well, talking to barriers, I think one thing I realized quite recently is our brains, and this goes for both women and men, they still live like out on the savannah, catching gazelles, being afraid of saber-toothed tigers. They're not engineered for this world of social media, money, all of these things that was invented back then. Which is where like a way I've gone about like dealing with my barriers that comes from those kinds of things. It's really like breaking them down, like making them as simple as possible. I like to use the analogy I used to get up in the morning for work back in the day. It's like, well, what choices do I have? I can either go to work or I can get fired. Well, that's a pretty simple decision then. And I just tried to basically implement that in like every area of my life. What happens if I do it? What happens if I don't do it? And most times I've found whenever like one of those barriers comes up, if I can say to myself, at least I'm not going to regret I didn't do it in the future, I should just do it. It's not even worth thinking more about all of the what ifs. And one of the things I have done and implemented as a habit to actually go out and do that is intentionally do things I think suck. For example, I do daily push-ups. I live in Denmark. There's a lot of puddles around. So when I go out in my garden and just grab some air, I see a puddle. I intentionally do push-ups in that puddle just because that's something my brain thinks, now, I don't want to do that. But it's just building that habit of keep doing, no matter like really how you feel. Like embrace the emotions, allow yourself to feel it, get it out as fast as possible. And like those, when the same with relationships, that's luckily where I've always had Linda, so I could always share to her. And I think sometimes for man it's easier to share like difficult things for women, at least it is for me. I don't know how other people's experiences is with that specific thing.
Well, I've got a couple points based on yours and Josh's words just now. Josh, I want to bring up that, you know, it's easy to look in the mirror and say that, yes, I need to make improvements, but the hard part is making that first step. I always like to say that the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off because people do not want to face the truth simply because we as adults, we are dug in. We are, we are so stubborn, and making change requires work. And we're happy to move along. And you were talking about, how our human minds right now are still in the savannah, and that's true. We're in an age now where we can just look at our phone and get these, millions of dopamine, our unofficial dopamine hits that we're not supposed to have simply because we're still looking for that gratification. We're looking for this, these likes and for these verification from people that we will never meet in our life that we claim are quote unquote friends. And we need to break it back down to, as you said, making those relationships with those that are actually in our lives. I can reach out and touch and reach out and physically love and know that I'm there for them and vice versa, instead of making this facade of a world where we're trying to get these strangers from all over the place just to give us a simple like and looking for that gratification and that verification of that we actually are worth something. And deep down inside we know that we are, and we don't need them, we just need the few that are around us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I would also add that, that reality check that we've already mentioned, and now Aaron, you also mentioned it as well. It's that first step, right? If there were to be any steps here, then first we are invited to realize that something even is. The isness of it. Yeah. The level of awareness to bring, shine the light of consciousness, if there were to be such a thing, and just realize that something is a certain way. Then we move to step 2, which is the understanding of it. We begin to get a feeling of, okay, this is the nature of it. It's an issue, for example, what we might be perceiving as an issue. Then we go to the level of competence. We know it through and through. We realize the connections between our problem and the rest of our life, which ultimately brings us to step 4, which is transcendence. We realize that, okay, there is a light side to it, there is a dark side to it, and there is just it. And then we are not influenced any longer by either going overly into the light and hyping ourselves up about something. We don't go too much into the depth of the shadow of it, we can then lead using the middle way. We can just become detached from the very issue so that it doesn't cause us emotional discomfort, for example. We can then, with full awareness, make really good informed decisions about how to proceed, how to reach that next level, if there were to be such a thing again in life, for example, in a given area of life, or even to realize that as it applies every single time, our problems are actually our solutions. And the only difference between problem and solution is the awareness. It's the perspective. This is the only distinguishment between the problem and the solution. And so, in the end, it turns out that virtually every problem that we have is actually a solution waiting to happen. It was just requiring a shift of perspective, a different approach, a different level of connection with the self, obviously. Hence, the intimacy with the self is so important, because then we project it onto other people. Those other people who are mirrors of ourselves from a certain perspective, then they reflect back a new level of unity, oneness, cohesion, depth of connection. And that can completely change the way we live our life. And also, apart from that, it also vastly, vastly reduces and eventually transcends any remaining, let's say, emotional suffering. And then, just as Steve is sharing here in the chat, the problem cannot exist without a solution. They are actually the same. And from a certain perspective, it's exactly the same case, I believe, with questions and answers. A question is actually just another perspective on an answer. They are both the same again. In the field of information, a question leads to an answer. Therefore, that's why also we say that ask and you shall receive. The question leads to an answer. When one is ready to ask a question, one is ready to receive the answer. And then our life becomes to be a game of defining really good questions to ask. The better the question, the better the outcome. And that in and of itself can be a game changer for so many people. And if only we are willing to go into ourselves, ultimately, with those, big, deep, probing questions, this is where life truly begins to be fun, because this experience is meant to be fun, right? And on top of that, we find standing that gold that Josh was talking about as well. And it's just one of many perspectives on how one can find freedom from suffering, hardship, scarcity, lack, because from a certain perspective, they are just one side of something greater, altogether greater. They are just one end of a certain spectrum. There is also the other side of the spectrum, obviously, but then there is also transcendence of both. And once we reach that level, well, this is where our life becomes to have a whole new level in a way that most people don't even realize exists in the first place. So I'm loving the conversation, Josh, and I wonder what you have to say about that.
What you just said reminded me of something that I read somewhere, that you can't, to heal from something, you must separate from it. And so, I'm thinking about, as you're saying, right, take any quote problem, right? But it's an invitation. It's an invitation. It's an awareness. It's information. And so I think one of the most, and it takes practice and it takes work. And I think like one of the most beautiful things about life is like, I don't ever want to like stop having to like be challenged by this shit. It's like, if like one day it's like fully enlightenment, then like there's nothing to do here as a human anymore, you know, like I'm gonna forget so that I can remember, and then I'm gonna forget again. And like, you know, bless spaces like this so we all can remind each other. But when I think about something like suffering or depression or anger, or, you know, I think the choice is when we do remember, because sometimes we forget, but when we do remember, the choice is, am I this or am I with this? Have I become the anger, or can I be with the anger? Am I depression? Am I depressed, or can I be with depression? And if we just create even a little smidge of separation there, you get to interact with it a little bit differently. There's just an opportunity, even if I get swallowed back up, you know, and I take an L for the day, right? There's a moment where I could maybe start to dance with that feeling or that story in a way, like Conrad, to your point, that then might become fun. You know, like I like to encourage people to think about, instead of I'm fighting depression, I'm dancing with depression, right? Instead of I'm fighting with my partner, I'm dancing with my partner, like conflict as a dance, right? And just little tiny opportunities to switch that. But it takes first initial separation to even allow that possibility to come into the field. Yeah, that's
I absolutely love where this conversation is going, because, you know, I heard a little bit about suffering and finding your place in that space. And it's like, what do you do with it? And so reframing it with, I'm with it, rather than it being done to you, or I am this, definitely a great way to start. And there's more. So when you find yourself in that space where you feel like you're suffering, it's like, okay, dear self, I'm suffering through this. How can I move through it? And you look for, or maybe you just, it just comes to you, this answer to that question. And I found that personally, when I get in a space like that, if I can do some type of meditative activity and just listening to a reframe of the words and realizing that, oh, I was in this space and what it was telling me, you know, feel it, even though it feels terrible at the moment, acknowledge it, and then go into this more empowered space where you're like, oh, it's okay, I felt this way. It was just telling me this. And oh, by the way, it's not even true. This is what the truth is. And then fall into that way of being. And, you know, the reason why this conversation is like so important today, I think, for everyone, is because a lot of times there's a lot of, we could do this, we should do that, but we don't always know how. How do we sit with ourselves? How do we take that action when we don't feel like doing it? And in some cases, it might be not doing something as well. And the thing that I wanted to add to this is that we all have this right to finding fulfillment in our work, in our relationships, and, you know, speaking to what we want, need, and desire has to become a part of the lifestyle. And the reason why I say this is because I don't buy into the concept of life-work balance. I don't, because then you're like, oh, I can have a really good work environment, you know, kill it out in the workforce, do a great job, be recognized, or I can have meaningful relationships and be close to my family and loved ones. And when you're trying to do this constant balancing act between the two, I don't think you can flow through that. And so to me, it's more about the lifestyle of living it. Like you can have both and you can do it at the same time. It's just a matter of figuring out how you show up in those areas. And so then it's not an either or, it's an and.
Yeah, I love that. And so as everybody was here talking, I let the things I learned throughout my experience flow with me, right? There's so many thoughts that were going on. Conrad said about, there's good and bad to everything that goes on. And honestly, when we sit with it, we experience it, we can come through it, whatever we're going through, right? There's success leaves clues is one of the things I love to say. And there's messages in all the things we hear, right? The Beatles song, Let It Be. Just let it be. If we can just experience that in our lives, we can come through it, whatever that may be. In every situation, there are three things we can do. We can accept it as if we chose it, right? And let that go. I know that this is happening to me. That's okay. I can exist with that. Or we can change it, right? We can do something to influence and try and make it work for us so that we can accept it, because that's the ultimate goal. And if we can't do either of those things, it's time to walk away. We have to leave it. We know, find a new option. So we can do that. And then it goes back to, the awareness. We don't want to ask ourselves. We don't want to know what's going on. But good leaders ask great questions, is what John Maxwell says, right? Ask yourself the deep questions, and you will, as Conrad says, come up with the solution, right? You will find the answer because you've asked it, and you will receive the answer. So I love that. And then as far as, I like what Mad said about, he goes and he does push-ups in the puddle, because we're not expected to do that. It's not something that a normal person would do. But here's another thing I love that Zig Ziglar taught me. If you do what you ought to do when you ought to do it, one day you can do what you want to do when you want to do it. It's about doing the hard things now, doing those things that we don't want to do, so that one day we can be fulfilled. We can find that happiness and joy. And then taking it back to the relationships that we were talking about. I love the story of Stephen Covey, where he tells about, a man came to him in a seminar one time, and he says, I just don't love my wife anymore. I'm considering what to do with our relationship, but I just don't love her. What should I do? So Stephen Covey said, love her. But you don't understand. I don't love her anymore. The love is gone. Well, then love her. But I can't. There's just no more love there. What can I do with this? Love her. Just live it. Love her. Give her that love that you've obviously been denying the love. Just give it to her. Experience it. Go with it. That's the ultimate goal, is to accept what we're experiencing. If we can't, we do something to change it. But the ultimate goal is to find, that's what fulfillment is. If we can accept what is happening to us, we can be fulfilled with it.
RJ, I want to offer a double-edged sword and kind of push back on
Go ahead.
Like the one, if I do the hard shit now, then one day I will be fulfilled. I think that's a dangerous game and a slippery slope, because I don't think it's about one day I'll be fulfilled. I think if we're always playing for I have to suffer now so that I'll be fulfilled, we're kind of just perpetuating suffering so that one day we might, and we're externalizing fulfillment. So I'm with you. I feel you on do the push-ups in the puddle, but I don't think it's so that we can achieve external fulfillment.
No, and if I may, I get where you're going with this. Totally, I understand that. I'm not seeing that as a matter of seeking the fulfillment. I'm just saying we have to put in the work, right? We have to do what we have to do. Whether we may like it or not, there are things we have to do. And if you do those things, you will get to that place of joy. You know what I mean? I'm not saying you won't find joy now, tomorrow, the next minute. I'm just saying I think we have to just do those things that we don't want to do.
And with that also, I feel that, it's kind of agree with Josh a little bit there, that it can be dangerous because we're always looking for, the next promotion that's going to give us happiness. We're always looking for that next race, it's going to give us happiness. And when we get there, it's not there. So we have to continue climbing up, thinking that the grass is always greener when it's not always true. When we need to just sit down, realize that what we have around us now, we can be happy with. We just have to accept. Of course, it's always going to be that case of working towards the betterment of yourself, working towards the betterment of your family, of your friends, but also to be in the moment and not realize that if I do this or that, that's going to bring me happiness, because I guarantee more times than not, it won't, because we're going to be working towards that next level. And we're going to find that we're going to be the same misery that we are now.
Exactly. And to the person that is sitting there and waiting for the next promotion to be happy, I would challenge them to go out, scale it back. What can you do to get fulfillment today? Doesn't need to be a big thing. Just ask yourself that general question. There is something you can go out and do. It can be visiting your mother because you haven't seen her a long time. That might be it. Or it can be doing push-ups in a puddle. It can be anywhere in between. It doesn't really matter. It's about like that journey. I like to use the Lord of the Rings example. Think about how long those movies are. If you haven't seen them, it's about 9 hours if you get the extended version, if not even longer. It's about 20 minutes of them putting that ring in that volcano. Life is the exact same thing. Like the journey of life feels so much more. So find a way to get fulfillment out of that. And if you're in a regular job and you realize this doesn't fulfill me and you have a family, support them, of course, but find, as Linda mentioned, to integrate it into your lifestyle. And really, how can you do things to actually within your lifestyle whilst you do other things? How can you also, like, whilst you clean, listen to that webinar or have your record like a microphone onto your phone so you can record like your podcast? It's all about creativity. That's the only thing that's stopping you, is not being creative enough.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So, sorry, is Dak here? Before the meeting started, something happened. There was a wind and electricity was lost. Power was lost. So that's the reason why if you can see me, it's still kind of dark here. But I would like to talk about this issue of fulfillment. I think I think fulfillment is basically like we enjoying the moment, the journey, and then looking back tomorrow at the things we done before and still be proud of what we did, because some people have done certain things that they are not so proud of. But at that time when they did it, it was kind of fulfilling. So in the tomorrow, when they look back and they're like, oh wow, I wish I didn't do this. I wish I didn't do that. Because at that time when they did what they did, maybe it was the rave of the moment, or they did it because to impress some certain people. And as at that time, to them, it was fulfilling. So, but tomorrow, maybe it might not be as fulfilling, or they might not be as proud of what they did then as they are now. So for me, fulfillment is like those little things we do, then maybe in 5 years, 10 years from now, you look back and say, yeah, I'm happy I did those things. Yeah. And fulfillment, nobody can really define what fulfillment can be, because my own kind of fulfillment might be different from another person's fulfillment, because different people from different backgrounds, and we all have our own challenges coming up and growing up. Yeah, because what I might have desired in life or might have been deprived of might be what someone else took for granted. So if, for example, for some certain people, I had a friend that he is the only child of his mom, and he grew up very poor, and his mom they lived in a one-room apartment. And for him, for a very long time, what he wanted out of life was to take his mom out of that environment. So when he actually did that, he was fulfilled. He felt fulfilled at that moment. So I think today he's still proud he was able to do that. So to him, that at that moment was fulfillment. And it doesn't just end there. We always want more, and we can always get more, but we shouldn't be too greedy and too it's good to be ambitious, but it's not good to be desperate, because sometimes it's the desperation that leads us to all sort of nonsense, which then we then later regret. That's just all I have to say for now.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those points, Yamin Roy. What I was hearing is that sometimes in our path to find fulfillment, we let judgment get in the way. And because at that particular time, we were doing the best we could with the situation. And if we're also looking for that end goal, then we lose sight of what is in that moment, in that journey. And so there is that navigation of being able to be less judgmental of on self and really appreciating what is. And it's all about being, I guess, thankful of the process that we're going through in general, and be less attached to the outcome. Because I believe that goals are important, ambition is important for sure. But if we put everything into achieving that said goal, well, what happens if you don't achieve that goal and something shifts in your life to take something away from you? Or, and so then we're not going to get fulfillment because we're working towards that goal that just didn't happen. And so then we become disappointed, or we become resentful of what's going on. And so we don't want to, go down that path either. And so I like what you're saying, Yamin Roy, about how your friend found fulfillment in helping out his mother. I mean, it's those little things which become the big things. And when we are open in our awareness field of appreciating those small but big things, then that is where you find fulfillment. And so recognize it when it's present, and don't be disappointed in that moment when it's not automatically there, because life is not going to always be in a euphoric state, or in the other state where you're at rock bottom. It's going to be an ebb and flow. And so navigating that becomes our life's work. And when we do that, then we have fulfillment in all areas of our lives, especially when you focus on nurturing your relationships. When you do that, it affects all areas of your life.
And I would also perhaps add that to follow that motive of Lord of the Rings, self-identification with something can actually become an issue. If we, let's say, come too close to the light, then we cast a really big shadow. That's how it works. And in Lord of the Rings, we have Saruman, the white wizard, who turns black in the end. Unbalanced he is, as it turns out. He wears white, yes, but then in the end, he just flips from the white and bright character into the very opposite version of him. Interestingly, Gandalf is Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf doesn't take sides. He knows words that kill, and he knows words that heal. He knows how to do both. And here is a certain level of mastery. This is the true mastery. From a certain perspective, a person who is good in a given business, they know the ins and outs, the highs and lows, the light and the shadow of a given business and industry. Not just one side, not just the glossy, not just the bright, the shiny. They have also experienced the opposite side too. And this is actually what makes, for a very fulfilling life in the end, that knowledge that it's not all glossy. Not every day is going to be easy. But then if we, let's say, stop identifying with the problem, stop claiming ownership, energetical and emotional ownership of something, this is where life can truly begin. Let's say to start with a simple example, I could say that this is my glass. This is a glass. I could say that this is my glass. I would claim ownership of it. I would start identifying with me as a person who owns that glass. But if I now drop it and it breaks, I will feel suffering because my glass has been broken. And so, by identifying with something as mine, well, this is where we get to the very issue of so many perceived problems. Because it can be my car that got damaged and now I suffer. It can be my bank account that isn't the way I would like for it to be. It can be my cancer that I might be self-identifying with. However, as Josh said very wisely at the very beginning, I feel, the moment we stop identifying with the glass, it's a glass that I'm using at the moment. It's a bank account that I have. It's a dis-ease, the lack of ease that I'm dealing with. Therefore, this is what opens a door to wholeness again, to health. Because self-identifying with a disease begins the process of matching its frequency. So the more we self-imply that it's my problem, my disease, my issue, we literally come into resonance with it more and more and more. It resonates with a certain frequency. We keep on repeating using language that it's my, and suddenly we start to resonate with it even more. However, when it comes to the healing journey, I also would agree, begins when a person decides that it's enough of identifying with a given illness. Because then this resonance becomes looser and looser and looser, and we allow ourselves to find health again. And to much surprise, do you know how difficult it is when sometimes you speak to people for them to describe health, vitality, radiant health, I mean glowing health? They have no idea what it is. They talk about disease a lot. They talk about the aches and pain. But when you ask them about health, they have no idea how to describe it. There is no concept in their head of life without a disease, for example. Never mind, by the way, that health doesn't mean that one just doesn't feel pain. I'm talking here about radiant, brilliant health. I mean, the glow that is visible around you, around your body, because you have so much life force. When wild animals come to you because you have more life force than they. This is the health that I'm after, which to so many people is even inconceivable that it can be had in the first place. And yet it can. However, for most people, many people still focus on the state that they wish to actually be far away from. They focus on the problem, they focus on disease so much that they attract exactly that. The more they focus on it, the more they attract it, the more they become one with it. Literally, no matter the disease, the more they focus on it, the more they self-identify with it, and it becomes a part of them. And this is far away from healing just yet, sadly. Because first, we need to realize that first, this state isn't perhaps my natural state. That this ease implies lack of ease, free flow of life force through the avatar and the system, right? So the moment we start actually embracing the idea, okay, I might be experiencing a dis-ease, this is the moment when the healing can begin. And the same applies, by the way, to being in deep rest. Deep rest is actually two words. Deep rest. When people are in deep rest, it means that they are recovering from something. something in their life causes them to be so tired that they require deep rest. So then the journey begins. What is it that they are resting from? What is not working in their own life that requires for them to go into that deep rest in the first place? And this is where we can actually start going from those, let's say, interesting states, because there is no judgment in the first place. Even deep rest will have its higher expression if only we know how to look for it. It will lead us to an answer. The problem truly is the solution. It really, really is, if only we are wishing to look at it that way. And perhaps to also add, the one last thing here that comes to mind is that when it comes to this notion of progressing through life, the journey truly is perhaps the destination. It's the journey that makes us. It's not even about the outcome. The outcome is guaranteed, so to speak, but it's about the journey. And we can shorten that journey when we realize that the word become is actually, again, two words. Be, and it will come. Become. And now choose. What is it that you would like to be? A person with cancer? Or a person who is healthy? A person who is fulfilled? Or a person who is struggling? Because you be it, and it will come. And that being can start today. It's a decision that we make, conscious choice, that we be a certain way, and that effect, that state will come. It cannot be any other way. And so I'm inviting everyone, and I practice what I preach, that becoming a given person can be had way quicker than most people even imagine possible. We can be so unlimited, so fulfilled right now. If one can only realize that, if one can only reach that far, so to speak, outwith of one's current state and just make this very subtle shift to be, decide today, I am a healthy, radiant, fulfilled, happy, loving person. Whatever it is that one might want to, let's say, experience, from there on, just as RJ was saying, one can start experiencing that. Love that woman. It's not a process, right? Not in 30 months. Love her now. Become love now. And you will see love. And that's another topic altogether. How we are matches what we see. So, okay, I'm wondering actually what Steve has to say, because this notion of identification with a glass, bank account, health, or otherwise, is from a certain perspective, in quantum physics, this is quantum entanglement. We are creating a connection with an object or a state or a person, right? My glass, my bank account, my wife, my disease. So this is very quantum physics in nature. And the moment we start playing a higher game, well, I have to tell you that language is actually a very funny thing, and it might be quite interesting to try to say things like my glass, my car, my room, my work, my wife. However, from a certain perspective, it also can be had with a bit of work, let's say. So, hey, over to you, gentlemen.
Okay. I would like to talk about the use of words, because I am from a very religious country. And like, for example, you could be in an ATM queue and you just meet someone. I say, excuse me, are you the last person? And the person will say, God forbid, I will never be the last. You know, things like that. And then we've had situations here where we would say, okay, you say something and they say you have said a bad word and you should never have said that. and you would not say, okay, this car, I'm going to have this car. And they're like, do you think you can buy a car with just your mouth? That, you understand? So it's kind of confusing when you say good things and people kind of brush it off. But when you say something bad and people kind of like, no, you shouldn't be saying that. Because for me, I think that when you say something, you're kind of owning to your responsibility that yes. Because if someone says, okay, is good, stop this nonsense. So when you say something like, okay, having a problem, for example, it doesn't change the fact that that problem is still there. It doesn't change the fact that the problem is still there, because you not saying it, or you saying, oh, let's say for example, someone is sick. It's when you come out and say, oh, I'm sick, that is when people can help you. Oh, that's when a doctor can say, okay, yes, this is what perhaps is wrong with you. But when you keep on saying, oh, I am well, I am well, I am well, it might even get worse. So what I'm trying to say is, when is it important for us to really know, okay, this is what this is how we can use our words positively. And sometimes we try to use our words positively so as it doesn't become a problem for us. I don't know if I'm clear about that.
Oh, I think you are. I think we were all just taking it in and seeing who wanted to respond. But I think what I'm hearing is that when we say that we are sick, then that brings it visible. And when we say we are well, then maybe it won't bring it visible, but we're trying to be more positive. And how do you, I guess, have a shift in mindset that could be empowering, but yet put it out there that you might need some assistance in a positive way, that where you can get the help that you need. And I think that's a great one, because if you think about, when someone has, a broken arm, then they're going to get help and whatnot. But if you have a mental, I don't want to say mental illness, but if you have mental unwellness, let's just say it that way, then it's not so visible. And, you want to be positive, you want to be empowering to the word, to use it for yourself and the way that you might bring something up. And I think there's a way to do it, and so that you're not just saying it's more rosy than it is. I think that that's really true. And, saying that I'm experiencing a tough time and I would like some help. And I don't know how I could go about it, but I want to. That's what kind of came to mind as you were talking, is how I could frame something up, and just the acknowledge what's going on, feel with it, reach out for help, and then be willing to let someone come in whatever way that is. And Yaman Roy, I have to share this right now, because you did something in a way that kind of touches upon this. Back to when my dad had passed away, you had asked me a question. You said, should I be reaching out to you to show that I care, or do you want your space and I should give you time and not really bring it up? And, that's an area right there where something like this can come in, because I actually wanted people to reach out, even though every time I would talk about it, I would become waterworks. Because I needed to process it. And even though I wanted to be brave and shoulder what was going on and be the strong person that I am, I actually wanted people to come and share their concern, and to allow me that moment in a private space where it wasn't front facing. Because in the workplace, you're probably not going to want to answer that with every person asking you, but at the same time, I really did want that from the people closest to me. So I don't know if this kind of helps, because that was a place where unless someone actually knew what was going on, they had no idea that it would take me like 6 months before I could even really process what was going on, because I was holding up the fort. I was holding up the fort at work. I was holding the fort up at home. I was holding up the fort in the family. And so unless you knew me, you probably didn't know that I was struggling with the whole notion of death, even though we know that, you know, it's going to come.
Linda, thanks for being brave and vulnerable there and bringing that up. And Yaman, to you as well. I think, you know, I feel like this is a both end situation where there is an acceptance, to RJ's point. There's an acceptance. We're not denying if you know, one is experiencing you know, sickness physically or mentally, you know, or unwellness, right, or a certain emotion. But I think there is maybe a nuance of not claiming it, because what might perpetuate that sickness is by claiming it. If I am sick, then what am I actually saying? Like, I am sick. I'm not sick. I am matter floating through space. I am Josh, as the name I've been given. I am infinity, right? I am not sick. Sick is something that we experience, that we are with, that we feel, right? I am not sad. I am feeling sad. I am experiencing sadness. And when we say I am any of these things, we actually don't allow it to be ours. If it's my sickness, then it can't be our sickness. And to Yaman's point, like being able to ask for help from your community, from your village, from your people, is where so much healing can come from. We are not meant to do this alone. We are meant to do it in community with our people who we love and who love us and who will show up for us. And we forget so often in our society that like it isn't all ours, you know. And could you like just imagine in this, especially, you know, for those of us in the States, right? Like imagine if every single time you turn on the TV and you see another shooting and another shooting and another shooting, it wasn't them over there. It wasn't somebody else's sons and daughters. It was ours. It was our brothers and our sisters and our kids that were suffering, that were dying. Imagine the feeling of powerful grief that would maybe save us from seeing it happen so often. And so I think anyone who is brave enough to name the heartache or the illness or the ailments or the struggle or whatever it is that they are experiencing, but to, you know, name it in a way of like, this is something I am experiencing, not that I am. And yes, like bring other people in, you know, call other people in, because we can, you know, if we take it off our own back and we put it into the center and we remember that we can all hold it together, because, you know, I'm holding mine and you're holding yours and they're holding theirs. But little by little, we put it into the center and we get to do that together, right? And so the honesty of naming it and then not denying it, because if you're feeling sick, and, you know, you look in the mirror every day and you say, I'm well, I'm fine. My head doesn't hurt. My nose isn't bleeding. I'm not, you know, like that's not good either. That's not going to get you probably any closer to being able to be healed, whether medically, energetically, emotionally, whatever it might be. So naming it, but naming it in a way where you're not owning it, because you don't have to. You don't have to own it. You don't have to claim it just as yours. We get to do it together.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what, I love what we're all talking about here is you know, because this was about relationship and communication and relationships and how do we nurture that. By the way, I'd love to just acknowledge Steve, who's been quietly just taking all this in, but he's been lighting up the chat and feeding us with information to talk about. So Steve, thank you for being here and just playing that part, because we've been feeding off your chat conversations. But I got to get going, so this is probably the last time I'm going to chime in. And so on the subject of what Roy brought up, and you've highlighted here, Josh, is that, you know, I think what we've kind of all been talking about is the relationship we need to have is with ourselves, right? In order to accept things, in order to find that fulfillment in the moment, we need to have that relationship with ourselves. And then, of course, yeah, when you say I am, that's the powerful statement, because whatever comes next is what is your feeling, how it's, how you're accepting it. So I get that. And so to talk about how Roy said, how do we know when we should voice something or not? Look, on Sunday, I was watching the Super Bowl, and I had a moment where I had to pay attention to what was going on within me, because I started experiencing what I can only describe as it gave me concerns that I was having heart trouble. And here I am, I want to watch a Super Bowl, so I'm denying what I'm experiencing, right? I'm trying to put that positive light on it, but here I'm experiencing something. And I had to acknowledge that, because one symptom led to another, which led to another, which led me to question. So now I was having mental concern. And the fact that I'm questioning is and having mental concern was creating further concern. And you can only put a positive spin on something for so long, right? Because now I had to look, I would have loved to stay and watch the Super Bowl, but I had something happening to me that was far more important. I considered whether I might have been having a heart attack. And so I'm sorry, but I had to acknowledge this for a moment, right? I needed to say, no, I'm experiencing something that doesn't sit well with me. This is not normal for me. This is not who I am, but I am experiencing something that I can't control, something I can't identify. I need to go and seek professional help. So by having that relationship with myself, knowing that this is not a normal experience for me, this is not something I have control over, I now need to take it to that next level, to the community, to somebody who has more experience in this than I do. And thankfully, it wasn't that heart concern, but there were other things going on with me. But by taking that acknowledgement of myself, knowing that this was not who I am or what I normally experience, I can now look deeper and go, okay, let's get this taken care of. So, I missed all the action of the Super Bowl, but I had something that was far more important at the time. So, guys, thank you for this conversation. I do got to run, but I love where this went. I love that everybody has, look, varying opinions, varying experience, but we've all added value to everybody who might take this in today. So, guys, thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of it as well.
Thank you. And,
Thanks, RJ.
for everyone that's on the call right now, yes, we were saying that we would speak to relationship. However, we are in relationship in this call. We're sharing with openness about our experiences. We're sharing openly about what it is that we define fulfillment to be. And we're listening to other perspectives. And I've gained so many perspectives just from this one call. And it's because we're in relationship. We're in relationship to be able to learn. And that is the whole premise for why we have the Men's Room show, is so we can create the space and show up and do this. And we can honor ourselves in this journey, and we can honor the other men that are with us doing the work. As some of you would say, we're doing the work to go down this pathway. So I appreciate every one of you on this call today.
Linda, can I read a quote really quick?
Yes, you may read us a quote.
Okay, so this just feels resonant based on where the conversation went today. This quote is from Rachel Brathen. It's one of my favorite quotes. It says, "Life is made up of a collection of moments that are not ours to keep. The pain we encounter throughout our days spent on this earth comes from the illusion that some moments can be held on to. Clinging to people and experiences that were never ours in the first place is what causes us to miss out on the beauty of the miracle that is the now. All of this is yours, yet none of it is. How could that be? Look around you. Everything is fleeting. To love and let go, love and let go, love and let go. It's the single most important thing we can learn in this lifetime."
Thank you. I appreciate you reading that quote, and I would like to include that quote. And so will you send it to me so I can put it in this recording that will go up for everyone.
Absolutely.
Does anyone have any other words before we close out this edition of the Men's Room Show?
I would perhaps only just wish to uh, add maybe that even this quote is such a good example, right? How we can choose to not identify with the current moment. Whatever we are going through, these too shall pass. We can let it go. There is no need to claim our ownership of it, the very present moment. If it's a high, we can let go of it. If it's a low, we can let go of it as well. As I tend to, let's say, as I invite people to look within and consider this notion of never taking a decision, never making a decision on a high or a low. Because normally those decisions, even those made on a high, they might not be the most fulfilling decisions after all. So let it go. Let us just become the next moment, the next version of self. And if only we choose to, perhaps we can also discover that we can very gently nudge that process by the way we speak about ourselves, about others, the world, what we reinforce, and how we treat ourselves also. Because all the decisions, if everything happens for a reason and our benefit, then every single second is priceless. Every single second is priceless. We are literally pre-sending the present moment. How we are right now will present our tomorrow. That never comes, ironically, but it will present the next moment and the next moment. This is what presence is, a present moment. So how we are at the moment, how we be, will come to be the next moment. And this is far from denial. If we are a certain way and we feel that that is so, yes, by all means. Reality check, by all means. However, then there is a matter of choice. Do we wish to carry on self-identifying with what is, which by then might be our past, if there were to be such a thing, or can we let it go? Can we actually loosen the tie? Yes, I was a certain way. That moment has passed. And now I can choose a destination, a direction. Do I want to go towards more of what was? Do I want to reinforce that groove? Or maybe I want to choose a different outcome, a different frequency to match. And I really like that quote, Josh. Really, really, well written. Lots of wisdom there. And yeah, I think it's another great conversation that happened thanks to Linda. So thank you so much, Linda, for organizing these events. And onwards and upwards and inwards we go.
So this concludes our edition of the Men's Room, and we're going to continue the conversation. And so we look forward to what that will be. And I want to put the invitation out here. If you are someone that's listening in to this conversation that we're having, and you would like to appear and be interviewed on the Men's Room, or maybe there's a group of you and your friends that would like to come in and have a panel interview, just like we're doing today, then we want to hear from you.